Hello, my name is Dr. Daniel Edelen. I am an assistant professor of elementary mathematics education at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm honored to be here with Dr. Richard Cox. And today we're going to be discussing the role and importance of empathy within STEAM tasks, and specifically the role that mathematical discoveries plays in student development of empathy. So first, let me turn it over to Dr. Cox and let him say a little bit about himself.
I'm Dr. Richard Cox. I'm assistant professor of elementary education at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. It's great to be here. Thanks for joining us virtually. I'm glad to be here alongside my colleague, Dr. Edelen. We've worked for many years sharing the message of the positive impact that engaging in authentic, meaningful, transformative mathematics and empathy in STEAM, the impact that can have in an elementary school classroom. So we're excited for you to see a couple classroom tested possibilities that reveal that impact. So when I think of great STEAM learning experiences, the question or problem under investigation really necessitates the use of multiple STEAM subject areas to figure out something. So if you look at the slide there, using the STEAM subjects together in ways that mirror how we use them in real life to develop solutions. So when I think of something great in STEAM, it usually means that you're using all the disciplines in important ways. This type of learning really develops students' STEAM literacy, where they see the importance of usefulness and are empowered by STEAM thinkers and doers. And that helps them become confident problem solvers, which is one of the goals of our collective work. In STEAM learning, each discipline plays a key role. For instance, take the global pandemic. At its core, it embodies all things science, but math really is used to model and make sense of the situation, both from a health and an economic and a resource, financial and other contexts. Statistics, proportional reasoning, algebraic thinking. So all that's embedded in the current event we're living through. Technology, for instance, essential for efficiency and production of vaccines. So it's a good example of an authentic context through which STEAM kind of reveals itself. The focus then becomes all 5 of the STEAM subjects. And really, that can be kind of confusing in STEAM teaching and learning. Sometimes we're compelled to try to hit all the subjects. But really, in the end, it's just maximizing the learning of each discipline the best you can, as long as the context remains meaningful. So today, you'll see a little bit of that'll be revealed to you in the classroom tested examples, how the context matters to make the learning authentic and meaningful for students. It's really not enough to do the math right in a mathematics block. We really do have to do it right at every turn and opportunity. So what NCTM, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, really urges us to do is find math that is developed within the context and outside of the math classroom. So rich and relevant experiences. So as you can see, a well-designed and effective STEM program is going to have a strong mathematics component, and indeed it really needs that. And often math is relegated to the periphery in STEAM and STEM learning in place of usually a science focus or a focus on the arts. But really what we're going to talk to you a little bit about today is how math can support, alongside empathy, can support really kind of rich and meaningful experiences in STEAM learning. Here you see the joint STEM position statement from SM and NCTM, and they really make the same cases Matt Larson did on the previous slide, right? The idea that we need to advocate for integrative activities across disciplines and outside of just a classroom period. Teachers want students to be excited about learning, to make meaning, to have mastery of math content practices. And it's really not new for us to point out to you that children's mathematical thinking is most deeply and enthusiastically engaged when their emotions and imaginations and experiences are in play. What is exciting, though, is that there are guiding principles that lead to a framework on how to do that. And so, what's always hard is the how, the what, and the why are usually a little more easy to navigate, but the how is always a tricky thing. So the three E's presented here on this slide, equity, empathy, and experience, provide for us a guiding lens through which teachers can begin to realize the aims of the reform documents highlighted just a few slides ago, and really kind of bring those reform documents to life in the classroom in service of students. These E's, equity, empathy, and experience, highlight and suggest how teachers might begin to imagine programs and reimagine structures in ways that disrupt the inequities of the status quo. So these are going to help move conversations forward and actually create experiences that are again, and we'll repeat it over and over again, authentic and meaningful. Separately, each of the E's presented here in the guiding lens is incredibly powerful. Imagine the impact of empathy and equity and rich experiences separately, but together they promise a tangible way to reimagine the math experience through STEAM teaching and learning for elementary school students in the pre-K through 3 space, especially. So our three E's, equity, empathy, and experience, provide a larger vision of what could be. Mathematics experiences intentionally approached and designed for each and every student that are rooted in connecting with experiences outside of ourselves. So here is the design thinking framework, the idea of building empathy first, defining a problem, and then following this iterative process to develop and find a solution that serves the greater good, that we are forced to step outside of ourselves a little bit and try to solve a problem together and in service of others. So we do math, but we do math for others. We do science, but we do science for others. So that empathy piece is really, really critical. So this design thinking framework is going to help us focus on what has emerged in our work as a critical component of the math classroom experience, and that's the empathy. As the first stage in the iterative design thinking process, uh, empathy again is the first thing that we ask students to do. As we work to define empathy, with kind of the definition evolves a little bit over time, it's critical to remember that empathy in this process is different from sympathy. So it's a conversation to have with students, and you'll see some examples of what that looks like in a classroom here in just a minute or two. But empathy is about feeling with someone else, connecting with the lived experiences of others. And not only is empathy a critical component of the inquiry model, but design thinking in this case, but engaging in it provides another access point to meaningful and authentic mathematics. And so STEAM is doing this really great thing where it's combining all these frameworks and guiding lenses. So we're pleased to share some of that with you today. So the central question of our work: how do we get our students to be empathetic with the person with whom they might not have the same experiences? So again, empathy is about engaging with others and honoring their lived experiences, and then we combine it with that design thinking process. And STEAM provides a nice lens through which we can view the work as well. So we've explored the why and a framework that begins to reveal how we might accomplish this type of teaching and learning in a math classroom. It's important to see those classroom tested examples. Remember, the how is really the critical piece. And hopefully these will inspire you. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Edelen, who's going to share the first of the two examples.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cox. So let's dive into a STEAM inquiry that we've done in an elementary classroom. So we want to give a shout out to Heather Simpson, of whom this task would not have been possible because she opened up her classroom and collaborated with us to really try it out with her students. Now, if you wish to read a little bit more about the inquiry in detail, see our article in the 2020 January issue of NCTM's MTLT Journal. I'll have the reference listed at the end of this session. So a few years ago, a classroom of students embarked on a mission to build tiny homes for a family in need. So students worked in design teams to build models of a tiny home for one family. Now, they learned and practiced multiplicative and additive thinking through scaling. And we gave them the scale of 2 feet in real life is equal to 1 inch on our models. And students built their tiny homes out of craft sticks first, so really that we could learn about insulators by running tests on several different materials being used as insulators in their tiny homes. And students placed these under heat lamps to determine the best material. We then had them use Tinkercad design software to recreate their models and 3D print them. And you can see a digital mock-up that one of the students created here. So this was the problem statement that we provided our students. Now, as you can see, students were positioned to really be part of a design firm. And our overarching goal was for them to plan, draft, prototype, and 3D print a tiny home to scale. And our students sought to help one family in need and learn about homelessness in the United States. Now, we typically try to intentionally frame our inquiries to really feel or be as authentic as possible, but also show children how STEAM thinking might be used to make their world a better place for everyone. So the inquiry took 6 days with 1 hour per day. Now, we spent 4 days focused on the mathematics and 2 days exploring the science content of the inquiry. As this inquiry focused on integrating the subjects in meaningful ways, we integrated engineering, technology, and the arts throughout really when it made sense to do so. And you'll see on the right side the overarching mathematics content that was the focus of the students' mathematical thinking and discoveries throughout the entire inquiry. So this is the full breakdown of the content throughout the entire inquiry. So as you can see, it looks like a lot. And our students worked very hard and we were able to include many components because of the amount that we pre-planned. Now, pre-planning is very important in STEAM inquiries. So for the science, we focused on insulating. The technology component centered around using Tinkercad to 3D print the homes to scale. And the engineering focused on constructing model tiny homes. And the arts really centered on design aspects and meeting the needs of the family. Now, this inquiry was very mathematics focused, and the underlying mathematics content was learning to really use additive thinking, modeling, and solve real world problems. So, this is one example of a student's blueprint that they drew to scale. So, in an effort to keep the task as authentic as possible, we used real world measurements of tiny homes and had students work within a scale of 2 feet in real life is equal to 1 inch on our scale. So we chose this scale intentionally because we wanted our students to be able to practice halving and doubling as a base for their additive and multiplicative thinking that they were currently building. So once our students had their tiny homes drawn to scale, we needed to build a physical model of the tiny home for later scientific testing of the insulators. And students use craft sticks to build the frames of their homes. Now, again, this was really another time that pre-planning was very important. And we planned on our craft sticks being about 6 inches long. And this gave us another opportunity to ask questions to help students really begin foundations of multiplicative thinking conceptually. And we asked, how many craft sticks would be needed to outline one side? So we also pre-planned for homes to be 12 feet high in real life so that one craft stick would make up the height of their modeled homes. Now you can see a photo of students beginning to group and frame out their homes with craft sticks here. So we really were able to accomplish much of this inquiry and learning goals due to the amount of student buy-in that we had. Now, our entire first day of our 6-day inquiry was devoted to being able to build empathy for a fictitious family that our students really did not know, nor did they have much experience dealing with homelessness themselves. So let's take a look at how we intentionally cultivated empathy for our students. Because, like Dr. Cox said, empathy has to be built through experiences. And in our inquiry, mathematics was really the vehicle in which we were able to accomplish it. So on day one, there it goes. So on day one, we started with this bio card. Now, we often provide bio cards in many of our integrated STEAM inquiries because it provides an opportunity to tell a story and to position students as the ones who will use their thinking to first understand the situation, but then also offer solutions. Now, we began by looking at a photo of a family sitting at a table that looked kind of sad and distraught. And we showed them an image of a family and we said, here is Susan. She's age 10. Charlie's a little boy, and he's 4 and has not yet begun school. And finally, here is Janice. She's the mother of these 2 little ones. The Calders are experiencing homelessness. Take a moment and try to imagine what is going on in this photo. So here you can see a copy of the bio card that we gave students for this inquiry. Now, we gave it to them and really gave them time to read it. And then after, we asked them to reflect on Susan's experiences. We asked them if anyone had felt tired during school, if anyone had missed the bus before. We added Susan to our inquiry purposefully. We knew that our students needed relatable experiences to begin to develop empathy, and Susan is really relatively their age. Therefore, it was easy for them to imagine what she might have thought and how she felt. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Cox and have him outline another example of an empathy driven STEAM inquiry.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Edelen. That is just a quick aside, one of my favorite STEAM inquiries that I think I've ever seen, the tiny homes. So thank you so much for sharing that with a broader audience. I know I've always been pretty enamored with that project and that experience for students, and it really highlights how powerful the and transformative STEAM learning can be when provided the kind of right conditions and context. I wanted to just share a little bit about a project, different group of students, but you'll see some similarities with the approaches and the how math is really rooted. It serves as the anchor, and empathy serves as the anchor. So this is a second classroom tested example of kind of the thoughtful, intentional, authentic intersection of math and STEAM teaching and learning. So in this example, students in the second and third grade class were tasked with and engaged in the design thinking process to design and build a prosthetic arm for a student in a neighboring school. So the client, and you'll hear me refer to that student as a client. That was really important to position students as design thinkers. So the client was born without the lower portion of her left arm, and yet, if you're a classroom teacher, you know this experience. She needed to press Control and Alt using her left hand in order to log into a school computer. So, uh, having been born without the lower portion of her left arm, this task that seems so routine and to many students was challenging for her. So what we had students do, they gathered resources, they evaluated conditions. On the previous slide, and no need to go back or anything, but on the previous slide, there was a form that students kind of evaluated the school's accessibility options. And so there was a lot of gathering of resources, evaluating current conditions. Students interviewed the client to engage in empathy, remember the difference between empathy and sympathy, and then created deliverables and goals almost as project managers would. All of these experiences were deeply rooted in rigorous grade level math content and practices like problem solving and perseverance and attending to precision, which constantly and solidly were revealed through the process. So the math was revealed through the process of empathetic engagement. Here in these pictures, students follow the design thinking process to share their individual and small group ideas, and then together decide what design to move forward with. So like the previous classroom tested example, students used Tinkercad, one of many free websites that are available to design the prosthetic, carefully attending to scale, proportion, and always returning to what the client needed. That's that design thinking and empathy piece. An example of math content revealed is the rich discussion around the difference, for instance, between millimeters in the design that was produced by Tinkercad and inches in quote unquote real life. So other content discussions were equally rich, and math was not simply an afterthought in this project. It was really a core component that helped drive the conversation around empathy. So things like I said, attending to precision, using tools strategically and appropriately, problem solving and perseverance, measuring using standard and non-standard units, principles of geometry, algebraic thinking. They were all there and all very present throughout the process, all grade level appropriate, all rigorous, and all kind of driving the conversation around empathy. The results were actual prototypes. The one on the left of this slide is the closest to what was provided to the client in the end, who found in the end the device useful in accomplishing the task, which was to press Control and Alt in order to log into the computer. Students followed the iterative design process start to finish and launched an actual product to a client who then used the product. So STEAM was revealed in its awesome ways. It was transdisciplinary, it was rooted in math, and it was rooted in empathy.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Cox. One of my all-time favorite STEAM tasks. If you've not had an opportunity to check it out, make sure you check that one out. So I'd like to just take a moment and think about the role empathy can play in empowering our students. So really, when we emphasize the A in STEAM, we really mean the arts, as in the humanities or the humanistic side of solving problems. So when an empathetic component is added to inquiries, it really positions students as being in charge of their learning because they want to solve the problems not for us as their teachers, but for whomever or whatever is in need of their expertise. Students thus feel empowered and capable in making the world a better place. So, with understanding the importance of empathy, we have several tips that we're going to offer in conclusion to our presentation. Um, and really, we can approach these in building empathy by committing to 5 principles and actions in our classrooms. So, first, keep the problems as authentic as possible. Seek out opportunities to engage with students in experiences that have multiple paths, solutions, and approaches, and really empower students as agents of change as they seek their own unique solutions to supporting others. And as educators, we are constantly observing and thinking of ways to bring authentic problems into the classroom. So, second, develop or even co develop with our students problem statements that place them at the center of the process and invite them to engage with the stories and the lived experiences of others. So, really, we want to keep this in mind at the center of our problem statements that we're going to provide students. And third, we need to move forward with STEM and STEAM education, honoring and valuing the experiences of each and every one of your students. So consider inviting them to use their strengths and inform the experience itself. So when we think of the experiences we want to provide for our students, we need to have access and equity at the forefront of this process. And we have to make sure that each and every student has an equitable opportunity to engage in the content as well as the context that the task is that we're providing. And four, Start small to really make a big impact. So we want to focus on the needs of a small group of people, animals, or even the environment. So from our work, we found it to be increasingly difficult to build empathy when our students are trying to make sense of multiple problems at once. So focus on one. And five, one of the most important things that we have found through our work recently is we need to make in engaging in empathy a continuous focus throughout the inquiry. So returning to the driving force to really help others is a way to refocus the content and the experiences. And it really anchors the experience in the why for our students. All right. Thank you. We've greatly enjoyed this. We're going to be online with you to answer any questions now, but should you have any other pressing questions we cannot get to, please feel free to reach out to us via our email addresses here.
Thank you all.
All
Good
right. Well, hello,
afternoon, everybody.
everyone. If you all have any questions, you're welcome to throw them in the chat. We're here really just to answer any follow-up questions or anything you might have specifically about STEM and STEAM.
While we wait, Dan and I were talking about the kind of lasting power of these experiences and how, even though both of them I think took place a few years ago, right? And it's a little blurry the past few years, but they still hold up and they still kind of um, are transformative and I don't know, not trendy or buzzwordy. They kind of hold. They are very stable, and so it speaks to the transformative power of STEAM teaching and learning, and that these are still experiences that we're talking about and using as classroom tested examples because they hold up against other kind of shiny things that pop in and out of education. STEAM is something that's steady and can be leaned into and transformative. So um, yeah, good examples.
Sure. Thomas, that's a really good question. And the vast majority of, at least from Dr. Cox and I's experience, is it kind of depends. The great thing about working with like specifically, the PK3 audience is they are very imaginative developmentally. So oftentimes we can specifically just directly write up a client and have them work towards that client, even though it might not necessarily be a real client. So for example, in the tiny homes, that was not a real client, but the students and the way that it was written up, even though they were told multiple times that it's not real, they still acted as though it very much was a real client and they were solving it specifically for that person. Um, but I think, in other situations, we're constantly just on the lookout for where STEM and where mathematics can be brought into the classroom and identifying some of those. So, on the tiny home one, that came from just a Facebook article that I had read and then was able to take that and develop it into a task. But Dr. Cox, I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Yeah, I mean, I as part of our STEAM lab, we always had I called it a STEAM town hall. So within the structure of the class itself, there was always space, almost like you would do a number talk or some other type of morning message or morning meeting or something else. I always had space at the beginning where we would identify questions, concerns, challenges we were facing, and then kind of work through what constraints there were. So there was always this kind of underlying design thinking vibe where we would look at challenges in the school and kind of asking. We always started with a divergent thinking activity. So there was space, time, and actual physical space in the room devoted to divergent thinking in a way that invited student input. And then what I would do is kind of curate that a little bit. And so I would look at what they were interested in or bringing up and think, okay, I have this second grade math standard I need to cover. So what a cool opportunity for us to, think through algebraic thinking through whatever they were interested in. So there was always kind of dedicated time and space, just like you would have a read aloud time or a morning message or a number talk or social emotional learning 2 minutes at the beginning or whatever, just actually building in structure um, is always a really great thing. Yeah, I agree. They are able to provide really awesome solutions, and we don't often tap into their imaginative um, lives enough. So it's just about just I kind of think the same way that you would work with them on routines and expectations and structures for a literacy block, you have to build in intentional structures for this type of thinking. Um, and so stopping and saying, like, well, what does it mean to be imaginative? So let's generate what that definition means. So, um, yeah, guided prompting is a great solution.
Yeah, I've had a lot of success with prompts and saying, a lots of uh, I want to solve blank for blank
mhm, yeah.
because, and I've really found that because is really, really crucial, and it's also helpful for them to be able to identify and justify, which again goes to our SMPs, our stands for mathematical practice too. So being able to
Mhm.
incorporate that, and that's been really helpful for them to be able to be as focused as they possibly can. But identifying a problem with for young children with design thinking is difficult, but sometimes we'll provide the problem and gradually work towards them being able to identify the problem on their own.
Yeah, and I think the one of the a couple challenges, right, is that developmentally, empathy is really tough for young kids. I mean, they're pretty much into themselves, which is where they should be developmentally, right? So empathy is tough to build, and just like we teach others skills, empathy is one we have to kind of explicitly teach. I've found that leaning into a classroom library. I know that's pretty standard for early childhood and early elementary teachers, but approaching design thinking at first through fiction
Mhm.
always worked for me. So, for instance, tiny homes, maybe if I were going to do that project, that would be a culminating project, but I would maybe start with one of the variations of the Three Little Pigs, in the big bad pig, the Three Little Wolves and the Big Bad Pig is a like great book that twists it a little bit, so it fictionalizes it, which takes some of the pressure off of having to come up with a solution or a problem or something that has to do with another human. So it kind of takes the edge off a little bit in the beginning, and then you're able to work into, okay, well, you learned how to do it with this fictional character, so how can you apply those same sets of skills, and soft skills, and um, otherwise, to something that's you know the classroom next door. So just leaning into books and that kind of stuff, those again are kind of standard ways to do it, but I found really helpful tons of literature out there about problem solving, perseverance, empathy, um, risk taking, creativity, curiosity, wonder, joy, all components that you have to stop and say, okay, now we're going to take a look at what it means to find joy in our work and find empathy in our work. So it's all kind of connected. The guided prompts, though, are really excellent. Having those at the
Mhm.
ready is always a really great way to get kids engaged in divergent thinking. I used to fill in a lot of extra space, and if I had extra time in the day, we would do a quick divergent thinking. It's just building capacity, and in those ways helps when you get to a bigger project. Looks like we have about 5 minutes left. So if anybody else has any questions, comments, or if you want to connect with us, we're glad to answer any questions and share any of our challenges along the way, lessons learned. Right, that's always a good way to um, help others, is to teach them what not to do. So if we're happy to share the good, the bad, and the ugly around this work, but it is, like I said in the beginning, transformative and lasting, and we still talk about it today. Yay, student teachers. Thank you for putting that in the I work with student teachers at
Mhm.
Winthrop, and It's my favorite. Don't tell veteran teachers, but student teachers are my favorite. Um, yeah, confidence in math is huge, and a lot of us come into math with some phobias and anxieties of our own. And so, if you have confidence, you're going to need to write a book because you're going to make a gazillion dollars sharing with others how you've gained confidence. So, don't be scared of math. You know, just be vulnerable with students and honest and try these things and you know model what it means to take risks and be curious. And,
We've really found empathy to kind of be uh, really the most important aspect when we think about like STEAM inquiries and getting them to connect. And it also really it helps because especially in math, you know, there's always this question, well, why do I need to know this?
mhm.
But if we engage our stuff in empathy like that, that question is automatically answered for them. So um, yeah, thank you. It's a really, really good point.
Yeah, and reach out if you ever want to chat more about this stuff. um
Absolutely.
we're happy to. And I think we're out almost out of time. So I think it just like we magically disappear, like we magically appeared and now we just magically disappear. So I don't want it to cut off. So again, we were so happy to do this and grateful to have you all in the audience today, the virtual audience, wherever you're from. Thank you for joining us, and just reach out to us if you have questions or anything. We're happy to chat.
Absolutely. Thank you all.